I've written before about the Convention of States movement, but this is a topic I'm frequently asked about. I know plenty of people both for and against such a convention, and I've written about their concerns as well. However, I've been asked to write not about the movement, but about the convention itself. So once again, let's dive into the Convention of States, look at the pros and the cons, and decide for ourselves that this is a solution to America's problems. So we'll do that next on the Constitution Study.
Love the neighbors and have a few good friends. Every day we're everyday Americans. Oh, every day we're everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study. This is where we read and study the Constitution of the United States. We teach your Russian generation be free, and I'm glad you could join me. Again, the Convention of States is a perennial topic. It keeps coming up. People keep asking me about it, which is why when someone asked me to do an op-ed, a slightly different version of this, I decided to go ahead and do it. So I hope you'll like it. If you want to find out more, if you want to see the quotes I'm using or the other article I did on the Convention of States, you can find that on the website constitutionstudy.com. But for now, let's jump back into the Convention of States. Let's start with the term, Convention of States. Now, some people like to refer to it as a constitutional convention or a con-con, but that's not really accurate. Then again, the term Convention of States isn't exactly accurate either. What we are talking about is an Article 5 convention, or a convention for proposing amendments. From Article 5 we read, "The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments." Why do I say that the term constitutional convention is inaccurate? Because under the Constitution, this convention is not to draft a new Constitution, but to propose amendments to the existing one. The original Constitutional Convention was called when the Convention to modify the Articles of Confederation determined it'd be easier to start from scratch and ask the states to authorize them to draft a new constitution. That's also the reason why I say the term Convention of States is a more accurate title, since the states would be sending delegates to the convention. But that's not exactly accurate either. It's not a general convention of states, but a convention to specifically propose amendments to the Constitution. By the way, it's important to recognize that neither Congress nor a convention can amend the Constitution, but only propose amendments to it. Only the states have the power to amend the Constitution, continuing from Article 5, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by convention in 3/4 thereof, as one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. Now, whether by 3/4 of the state legislatures or conventions in 3/4 of the states, only the states have the authority to actually change the Constitution. Also, contrary to what many in the legal community have said, any amendment to the Constitution, once legally ratified, is just as much a part of the Constitution and therefore as binding as the original 7 articles. Now, we also need to remember that the states created the Constitution, which created what we now call the federal government. One of the problems the Founding Fathers had with the Articles of Confederation was the amendment process. There wasn't one. Only the requirement under Article 13 that any changes to the Articles had to be unanimously agreed to by all the states. Nor shall any alteration at any time thereafter be made in any of them unless such alteration be agreed to in a Congress of the United States and be afterwards confirmed by legislatures in every state. So when they drafted the Constitution, they included a formal amendment process in Article 5. This process uses 2 distinct steps: the proposal of amendments and the ratification of the proposed amendments. The convention for proposing amendments is, as its name suggests, part of the proposal process. Since the states created the Constitution, it only makes sense that they have a way to propose amendments to it. Since the beginning of the Republic, only the representatives of the people, the House, and of the states, the Senate, have proposed amendments. The framers of the Constitution were not fools. They knew that there may be changes to the Constitution needed to protect the people and the Republic that those in Congress would not support. For example, You wouldn't expect Congress to propose an amendment to limit their own powers. Sure, Congress proposed an amendment to term limit the president, but does anyone think they would propose one to term limit themselves? Hence the need for the states, as the creators of the Constitution and the federal government, to have a method of proposing their own amendments. This method is in the convention process. There are a lot of people who fear the convention process, while plenty more think it's the salvation of the republic. So which is correct? Actually, there's a little bit of both. I find the fear of the convention process interesting, since it and the congressional process propose amendments. There's no legal difference between the two, and both are capable of destroying the Constitution and the republic. In my mind, the reason to fear the convention process is not the process itself, but its abuse. The Congressional Research Service has already published a paper on the subject. The state legislatures are indispensable actors in the Article 5 convention process. Nothing can happen unless 34 or more apply for one. Congress is equally indispensable to the process by which a convention is summoned, convened, and defined. Yes, the states are indispensable to the convention process. But what is the indispensable role of Congress the CRS is talking about? The Constitution, with characteristic economy of phrase, simply directs that Congress, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments. Beyond this language, however, observers have identified subsidiary issues for consideration by Congress, of which 5 may be among the most important. Don't you just love how people take the simple words of the supreme law of the land and then add their own in order to do whatever they want? The only role Congress has in the convention process is to call the convention, then determine whether ratification will be done by the individual state legislatures or conventions in each state. Nothing more. Congress, in its own twisted logic, wants to read into the Constitution language to give themselves powers over any convention. They view themselves as the guardian of the convention, to define the role and responsibility of the convention, and even the power to determine if any amendments proposed by the convention is to be sent to the states for ratification. The idea that Congress is to be the guardian of the convention is irrational and not supported by the language of the Constitution. The arrogance of assuming Congress gets to decide if the states should get a chance to ratify the amendments they had proposed in the convention would be beyond belief if it hadn't come out of Washington, D.C. Does that mean there is no risk should there be a convention for proposing amendments? No. There are risks in everything we do. Sure, a convention could propose the repeal of the Second Amendment or overturn freedom of speech or the protections of our right to due process. Then again, Congress can propose the exact same amendments, but people don't seem to be afraid of that. Remember, in 1917, Congress proposed an amendment that infringed on your right to the liberty to manufacture and sell liquor. In short, any amendment a convention can propose, Congress can as well. That's not to say there isn't a good reason to hold a convention. Personally, if I were a delegate to a convention for proposing amendments, I can think of a few amendments I would propose. Repeal of the 16th and 17th Amendments would be near the top of that list, along with limiting Congress's ability to borrow on the credit of the United States. However, there are plenty of amendments people are calling for that I could not support. Why? Because as much as people believe they would solve our problems, they cannot. See, the thing about amendments to the Constitution is they only amend the Constitution. When I look at most of the amendments people are calling for in the proposed convention, I find most of them are already covered by the Constitution as it's written. Require members of Congress to live under the same laws they passed for the rest of us. That's the 10th Amendment. Impose limits on federal spending and or taxation. That's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Get the federal government out of our healthcare system. The 10th Amendment. Get the federal government out of our education system. The 10th Amendment. Stop unelected federal bureaucrats from imposing regulations. Article 1, Section 1, Clause 1. Remove the authority of the federal government over state energy policy. Again, the 10th Amendment. Force the federal government to honor its commitment to return federal lands to the states. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. Probably the most common request for an amendment I hear involves term limits for Congress. Members of Congress only serve as long as they get the majority of the votes. So you can set your own term limits. Simply stop voting for someone once they've served as long as you think they should. Yes, you can set your own term limits, but you cannot force others to agree with you. The thing most people don't realize about term limits is they don't so much limit how long a person can serve in office, but who the people are allowed to vote for. Besides, if an amendment to set term limits on Congress were to be ratified, all it would do under our current system is further empower the political parties. Now, rather than having to show yourself worthy to both the party and the people, all a politician would have to do is be a good party member and wait their turn for office. We come back to the question I'm most frequently asked. Would a convention of states fix the republic or not? Well, I cannot see into the future. Here's my assessment. First off, should a convention be called, there will be a lot of attention paid to the issues it brings up. There will probably be more spin applied to those issues than a hyperactive top. Everyone will have their own opinion, probably the one that most benefits them. It's just as likely that different sides will spend more time talking past each other than actually debating the amendment. In other words, pretty much politics as usual. If some of the amendments that have been at the center of this discussion should be passed by the convention and sent to the states, the whole media circus will simply start over again in an attempt to influence the legislatures and conventions in the several states. Let's say that some amendments get proposed, even ratified. Will that make a difference? My guess is, in the short term, it will. After all, the politicians will be watching as much as anyone else. However, in the long term, I don't think such a convention would be much help. Sure, the convention may propose some bad amendments, but that's not where I see the problem. As I pointed out, most of the problems in Washington, D.C. aren't the language of the Constitution, but the fact that we don't follow it. Think of how many regulations come out of the Departments of Education, Energy, Transportation, Labor, Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, not to mention the Environmental Protection Agency and the Office of Science and Technology. None of those departments and agencies are authorized by the Constitution, yet they exist and write regulations that are enforced as law in violation of the Constitution. Then there are those who claim that the 14th Amendment would allow President Biden to effectively raise the debt ceiling in violation of the laws passed by Congress. How would making things extra unconstitutional change any of that? That said, what if the convention proposed some good amendments? Not only the ones I mentioned I would propose, but some others we haven't even thought of yet. What if they get ratified by the states? How long before the politicians and bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. simply start ignoring them as well? I doubt it would take the corporate media and activist groups very long before they demanded that the language of the Constitution shouldn't stop them from doing what they think is right. If you think the courts would save us, remember, the Supreme Court has a history of putting the power of government above their oath to support the Constitution. Like so many things in life, there is no panacea, no simple fix to all of our problems. What we need is a good, close look at what we individually are doing. Are we following the Constitution, the supreme law of the land? Are we hiring public servants who are fulfilling their oaths to support the Constitution? Most importantly, when those we hire to represent us fail to fulfill their oaths, do we find better representation? Rather than looking for someone else or some legal maneuver to fix the republic, if we simply took responsibility for our actions, most of those problems could be fixed long before they got large enough for anyone to even consider an amendment to the Constitution. So there is again the Convention of States, the idea of we need to propose certain amendments. I agree, there are amendments I would like added to the Constitution, but the vast majority of the ones I hear talked about wouldn't actually fix anything. The problem isn't that the language of the Constitution is wrong, it's that we simply refuse to follow the language as it is there. Rather like the Congressional Research Service saying that even though the Constitution says that Congress just calls a convention and determines the mode of ratification, they say, well, you know, the economy of language, we can go off and do a lot of other things. Go back to the original language, stick to it, and the vast majority of the problems we complain about go away. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it won't take work to do it, but I don't think a convention of states is going to fix the problem. Then again, I don't think a convention of states is the boogeyman that so many people seem to make it seem to be. But I challenge you, take a look at the Constitution, read it for yourself and tell me, where am I wrong? Where are the issues not fixed by the clauses I already mentioned? I know we'd like to find some big deal. We'd like to throw the Hail Mary, the big bomb, the big pass, the home run hit that changes the whole thing and saves the day and wins the game. That rarely happens. It's the small moves, the 2-3 yard gains that over time make a difference. And we spent decades making this mess. We can't expect to fix it in a few simple years. But I challenge you something else. As I said, read the Constitution. But let me ask you, are you living by what the Constitution says? I saw another video this week of a man who was arrested for exercising his free speech. He wasn't disrupting anybody. He wasn't harming anybody, but he was arrested. But what I noticed is when he was arrested, neither he nor anyone else around him recognized the violation of the Constitution. Well, I think they recognized the violation of the Constitution. They weren't prepared to defend their rights. Not one of them mentioned the fact that the officer was committing a federal crime. Not one of them made sure they had the name and the badge number so they could file the complaint. That's what I want to work on. And that's what I hope will happen with the Constitution Study Patriots. That we can help educate people, that we can communicate this type of information, find out what's going on and help people. And then, again, have people that can activate, can show up and help when rights are under attack. Is it going to fix everything? Probably not. But I want you to recognize it's not meant to replace what you're already doing. It's meant to help you do what you're doing better. So I hope you'll join me. Check out the website, constitutionstudy.com/patriots, to find out more about the Patriots program. And there's a link in there for the mini boot camp as well, which I'm still trying to get organized. Either way, check it out. I think it may be a very interesting program that many of us can find helpful and enlightening and invigorating. Now, if that's the stuff you're looking for, the idea of looking at these events through a constitutional lens, looking at ways to live a more free, liberty, and constitutional life, well, then I hope you come back and join us here next time for the Constitution Study.